Hello everybody and welcome to the Royal College of Nursing Students Committee webinar called Why Have a Professional Body for Nursing? A chance to explore how the RCN supports our professional values and standards. A very warm welcome to everybody. Thanks for tuning in. I don't know if you have been able to tune into any of our previous webinars, but we've been running a series now of one or two every week for a good couple of weeks. We run them on a number of different issues, from transitioning to newly qualified nurse to the next steps for students in the response to COVID-19. They are slowly being uploaded to the RCN YouTube channel. So if you've missed any of those, please do look them up on that channel because they have been really useful. I looked at the one next steps for student response to COVID-19 today, and it was really good. It provided a lot of clarity on the way forward for students, and I really recommend looking it up. If you have trouble finding it through the YouTube channel, please head over to the RCN Students Committee social media platforms and you'll find links to them there. So thanks again for tuning in. Thanks for joining me. My name's Kendall. I am one of two hosts hosting you this evening. I'm a third year adult nursing student at Bournemouth University, and I'm also the student member for the Professional Nursing Committee. Because I'm the student member, I'm also on the RCN Students Committee, which is why I'm here hosting you. You might be wondering what the Professional Nursing Committee is. It's otherwise known as the PNC, and it's made up of members of the RCN, and it's there to help the RCN fulfil its role as a professional body. And that includes looking at professional nursing standards. And that is why tonight we've chosen to combine the topic of the RCN's professional body and the really important topic of nursing professional values and standards. We've combined those two and we've got some really interesting themes to talk about, and we hope that we're going to add some real value to you. I'm hosting alongside my colleague George from the Students Committee. Would you like to say hello and a little bit about yourself, George?
Hello, my name's George Cade. I'm a third year adult nursing student at the University of South Wales, and I'm the RCN Students Committee member for Wales, and I'm the only one on tonight who's not part of the PNC.
Thank you, George. That's great. Thank you. So the running order for tonight. So I'm going to introduce our guest speakers. We have 4 wonderful guest speakers who have agreed to join us. And we're going to ask them 6 pre-prepared questions. They're on this theme of values and standards and the RCN as a professional body, and we think they're going to be really helpful. They'll be super helpful whether you're a qualified nurse who've been qualified for many decades or a brand new nurse or indeed student nurse. They might even be useful for some of your academic writing that you might have to do as part of your degree too, so fingers crossed there. During this time, if you have any questions that pop into your head, or indeed if you have any already, please pop them in the comments box, and George will be monitoring those, and he's going to come in after our 6 questions are done, and he's going to come in with some additional questions for our guests. It'll then be back to me for the final goodbyes and thank yous. This should take roughly an hour, and so hopefully it'll be a good hour. So to our wonderful guests, first of all, I'd like to say thank you so much for joining us and agreeing to share your time and wisdom with us. As I said, I've got 4 guest speakers, and they're all members of the Professional Nursing Committee alongside myself. I'm just going to ask each of them to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about themselves. We'll start with Rachel Hollis, who is the chair of the PNC and member for Yorkshire and Humber. She's also going to share a little bit more about what the PNC does. Rachel.
Thanks very much, Kendall, and thank you so much for the opportunity of joining you this evening. I and my colleagues really appreciate that. So my name's Rachel Hollis, and I'm a children's cancer nurse working in Yorkshire. I'm the chair of the Professional Nursing Committee, and as Kendall has said, I represent Yorkshire and Humber on the committee. I've been on the committee since its inception, which was at the beginning of 2018, but only its chair since the beginning of this year. So as I'm sure people recognise, the RCN is a pretty unique organisation because it has these two principal functions. One, it's a Royal College and it's our professional body for nursing, and it's also a trade union. And those two functions can work really well alongside each other to benefit us, the members, our patients and the public. The RCN is governed by its council, which provides leadership and direction across the whole organisation. And then the council has delegated areas of responsibility to two principal governance committees. So the Professional Nursing Committee is one of two principal governance committees of the RCN, sitting alongside the Trade Union Committee. Each of those committees has elected members for the devolved nations and all regions of England, as well as a nursing support worker representative and, of course, a student representative. So we have Heather Massey doing a great job for the Trade Union Committee, and, of course, Kendall doing an amazing job for the Professional Nursing Committee. So the Professional Nursing Committee, and let's call it PNC from now on because it's quicker, is responsible for the RCN's professional work. On behalf of RCN Council, we oversee the work of the RCN as a professional body, as a Royal College, guided by our Royal Charter, which you can still see a copy of in the college whenever you're allowed to go back in there. We're a governance committee, so we don't do the work. We work really closely with our executive lead, Susan Masters, who's the National Director for Nursing Policy and Practice, and her great team on the staff of the college. And together we work to move forward the professional agenda of the college. Thank you, Kendall.
Wonderful, thank you, Rachel. That was really useful, thanks. So next up we have Siobhan Donald. She's Vice Chair of the PNC and Northern Ireland member. Siobhan, would you like to say hello?
Yes, thank you, Kendall, and thank you, Rachel, for that introduction to the PNC. My name is Siobhan Donald. I am the Vice Chair of PNC. My role is I'm the Interim Assistant Director of Nursing in the Public Health Agency in Northern Ireland, which has a function of both commissioning and service development standard setting regionally. My work programmes are currently workforce, primary care and health and criminal justice, but my background is in unscheduled care through acute medical and the emergency departments. So I hope I'll be able to contribute well to the discussion tonight. Looking forward to it, and thank you for the invitation.
Thanks, Siobhan. Okay, next up we have Professor Julie Green. She's the West Midlands member for the PNC. Julie, I think you might be muted.
There is always one, isn't there? And my very muted, I think. Thank you very much anyway for the introduction, Kendall. My role is as a member of the PNC, and I'm also chair of the Royal College of Nursing District and Community Nursing Forum, so do quite a lot of work across the piece with district nursing. I'm a district nurse by background. My current role is Dean of Education at Keele University, and I'm also a lecturer in nursing and hoping to contribute to the discussions about standards and values today. Thank you.
Thanks, Julie. And finally, we've got Professor Alison Leary. She's the PNC member for London.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Kendall. My name's Alison Leary, and I am a registered nurse and mathematician, and I work at London South Bank University as a Professor of Mathematical Modelling, and I'm really looking forward to this discussion tonight.
Lovely, thank you, Alison, and thanks again all for joining us. We really appreciate it. So we'll roll straight into the questions. We've got a huge question to start, Alison off with actually. So Alison, what are the professional values and standards of nurses?
That's a really big question. When I saw it, I thought, wow, that's a really big question. But, you know, going on the paperwork, the NMC, really the Code of Conduct sets our standards. So, and I'm sure everyone's familiar with those. So, but I think our professional values are articulated in different ways. So we articulate them through our professional practice and our code. So if we take, for example, prioritising people, which is in the NMC code, then we articulate that through our professional values around dignity and person-centeredness and working in partnership with people. So I think there's something about our voiced professional values through our standards, such as the Code of Conduct. And then there's our personal values, which come from our own ethical and moral frameworks. So, and if anybody is writing about this, Leslie Bailey wrote a really good book on this topic. So if we think about the different aspects of professional values, particularly, it's really around our expectations of ourselves and our expectations that the public and that the people we care for can expect from us, I think. So our ethical frameworks, the legal framework in which we practice, also increasingly the policy framework in which we practice. And we've had some interesting conversations about policy, particularly around workforce and the ethics of that with students in the recent crisis, which has been quite interesting. But being person-centred and holistic, working in partnership, working with other members of the team, I think these are all our professional values.
Lovely. Thank you, Alison. That was really good. I wish I'd not handed in all my assignments already. Okay, so moving on to the second question, which we've got for Siobhan. How are professional values determined, and what input does the RCN have?
Thank you, Kendall. I think this is quite difficult as well, because it's trying to partnership in terms of what the RCN role might be in relation to professional values, and building on what Alison had said, really, in terms of the personal values are the reflections of personal values, and then what they're gained through nursing with the process of experience and learning in life, I suppose, in terms of, and it's an important concept when students are, I think, looking at their critical analysis of what their experience is through life and what they're learning through their professional studies. But I think the expectation of the public in relation to a delivery of compassionate care is expected from nurses, and I think that's why it's considered to be a universal professional competency, I suppose, or skill of nursing, and I think it also forms the foundation of the nursing practice, as Alison has said, and that all nurses must practice in a holistic and non-judgmental and caring and sensitive manner. So I think there's a number of ways in terms of it's also within part of the NMC in terms of the teaching and the domains, and how we can, the professional values, working in partnership with service users. So I think what Alison has said, it's very much in relation to what are personal values and how we portray these into the care that we deliver. Now, how the RCN can input into those professional values, or how they can influence how those professional values are implemented into practice, I think can be done through a number of ways. And Rachel, I think, referenced earlier on in relation to the Royal Charter from the RCN and that indicates that the college shall pursue the following objects, and one of them is to promote the science and art of nursing, and to promote the advance of nursing as a profession. And I think within that you can bring your values, and I think the RCN would incorporate the values into those different objects. And it also says is to promote the professional standing and interests of members of the nursing profession. And I think our values, our professional values are all incorporated into those within the Royal Charter, and in terms of how we can practice moving forward. And I think as the RCN would encourage students to be aware of how they portray themselves and how they are portrayed as a profession, and able to use those values to influence and negotiate, I suppose, moving forward in all aspects of the RCN. I was interested in terms of the 8 principles developed by the RCN with the partnership with the Department of Health and the NMC, which helps and it indicates that the principles of nursing practice describe what everyone from nursing staff to patients can expect from nursing. I mean, you can find out about all the different principles, and they all describe about what constitutes safe and effective nursing care and covers the aspects of behaviour, attitude and approach that underpin good care. And I think that's how the RCN can influence the value of the professional values of nursing and how we are seen by the public, by the government and by the patients and people that we serve and the people that we look after, or the people or the profession that we represent on an everyday basis. I suppose other things that I looked at in terms of how the RCN can input into it would be in relation to the values of the RCN, and I mean in terms of just what their values are as an organisation, in terms of like valuing people, and about the greatest asset that the RCN indicate that they are proud of the commitment to enable them to take careers in any direction. And I think that's how the RCN would encourage the professional values by focusing on behaviour, encouraging staff to develop, so it's coming from internally, both personally and professionally, to benefit themselves. And I think that's the culture then with the organisation that can support nursing to build on the values whenever they are practising their work. But I suppose the biggest thing they're seeing is in terms of articulating the unique role of the nursing family across the life course of individuals and communities. And I think that's the ethos within the RCN, and how they can input into the professional values of nursing is that they are a major contributor to strategic operation and public policy within all fields of nursing. And I think it's promoting health, and I think the student and the nursing profession can promote both excellence and professionalism from a very early stage in their career. And I think the RCN helps to support that and input that by engaging with all the other stakeholders in the UK to influence and shape the policy and practice, because all of these personal and professional values will have an influence on how nursing is seen as a profession. And of course then the RCN also has the forums, in terms of which there's a number of professional forums which are bodies which are established by the council to provide an opportunity for all members with a shared background, which helps them to network and share best practice and lead the development of knowledge within special areas of interest. And I think that is how professional values in the RCN can input to ensure that they are brought forward through the culture of nursing and through the professionalism of nursing, and how we can develop as a profession and influence at all levels of any organisation to have our professional values with our science, knowledge and background as a whole competency framework moving forward. So I think that's how the RCN can support the professional values.
Fab, thank you, Siobhan. You're right, that was a huge question. That was really comprehensive, thank you very much. So we're going back to Alison for question number 3. Do you believe that nurses across all fields of nursing and job roles should have the same professional values and standards, or should they vary depending on where they are and with which patients a nurse is working with?
I think generally people do have the same professional values and standards, and actually it goes outside of nursing as well. So if we look at things like other safety critical industries or other areas of public life, there are principles of public life such as integrity that everybody really should work with. I think the application of the values probably is different in different areas in which you practice, and that's part of professionalism. So being able to hold a framework of value and express it professionally and apply it into the world that you work in is really the mark of a professional practitioner. So I think that the answer to the question is they're probably at the core all the same. So if we look at something like working in partnership, I think most people would sign up to working in partnership. But we might express that in different ways with different client groups or different colleagues, or in different areas of practice. For example, if we work in public health, that might look very different to say if we work in learning disabilities. So yeah, I think there's a very much a common core of those professional values, and in many ways that probably unites us in trying to provide the best care.
Lovely, thank you very much, Alison, that's great. Okay, so we're moving on to question 4 for Rachel. How are professional values and standards promoted by the RCN? And what can it do to help me develop in this area as I progress through my career? So I guess as a student nurse and beyond.
Okay, thank you, Kendall. And I talked earlier about the fact that the RCN has these two functions of professional body and trade union. And actually, I think that both of those functions are really important in promoting those professional standards and values, and also in supporting nurses in developing them. But I think thinking specifically of the professional body, then I think there's a lot of work that the RCN carries out on nursing standards, work that it carries out on education and practice. And these are promoted by the college in a number of different ways. So on the website, you'll see a range of professional resources that are accessible to members. Again, a range of publications that come from the college and that come from our forums, and I'll talk a bit more about our forums shortly, and through events which are held by the college in happier times. And also through lobbying on behalf of nurses and advocating for members. And I think that's another really important part of the work of the professional body of the college. It's part of the work that, as the Professional Nursing Committee, we support. So I think those are some of the ways that the RCN can promote professional values. But I think also, just to pick up on Siobhan's point about the professional forums that we have within the college, and Julie, I know, is a forum chair, and I think that the work of the forums is actually one of the really important ways that we can promote the professional values, the professional standards, is through our forums and our networks. And you probably know that there are, or you may not know, but we have 35 forums and networks within the college, which really span the breadth of nursing practice of our members. And you're able to, as a member, join one or more of the forums. You can do that as a student, you can do that at any point. And that's a great way, not only to develop yourself in the profession, develop your practice, develop your own standards, but also actually to contribute to the development of the profession. And I think the forums are central really to some of that professional work of the college. They will develop career and competence frameworks. I know Alison's worked with a number of forums in doing that. They write publications and guidelines and assess their impact, and work with staff from within the college to arrange events and to represent the RCN in a range of different settings, really helping to make sure that the RCN speaks with the voice of its members, which is when it's at its strongest really, but speaks also with the voice of the profession.
Lovely, thank you, Rachel. So much like how the values and standards are really complex and nuanced, so is the RCN's work in that area. That's awesome, thank you. So the 5th question goes to Julie. What happens if I believe there is a conflict between my professional values and standards and what I'm being asked to do by my employer?
Okay, thank you. And I must congratulate whoever thought of the questions, because I think they really are challenging and they're really interesting. So in terms of this one, it differs between impact of standards and values. So I think I'm going to sort of split it in two in terms of how it can be approached. So the very simple answer is that the code allows us to deal with conflict and areas where patient safety may be jeopardised. So I think we can use the code and act according to the code, especially as Alison has cited in theme 3, which is preserving the safety of the patient. So I think as a practitioner, as a student, as a nurse, as a midwife, if you feel that a patient's safety is being put at risk because of something you're being asked or required to do by your employer, that's relatively simple solution, because I think you can use the code. There are some really interesting sections on the NMC website and some interesting scenarios to work through as to how to raise concerns and how to process that. And it's quite black and white. I think when we get into the realms of values, it becomes a little bit more of a grey area in terms of how to deal with it. The guidance in terms of standards is that we obviously always put the concerns of patients at the heart of that, and we are there to protect them, especially if we feel that they are deemed to be at risk. And we need to speak up on their behalf, and that is not, there's no choice in that. We have to do that, and we are duty bound by our code. So about raising concerns, doing nothing and failing to raise concerns is unacceptable. So if we are aware that there is any risk to patients, we should be escalating that. And the process in terms of escalation is advised initially. So as a student, it would be your practice supervisor, practice assessor or academic assessor, moving up to a line manager or someone who is a designated person in that clinical area, escalating to a higher area and getting regulatory organisational support, which could be the NMC, the RCN, and there's also a website called Prevent, which is an area that offers support if people have concerns. So it's that important act or omission. It is that if something is missing or something is done and you are concerned about patient safety, then there is a clear process supported by the NMC code about how to act about that. The guidance applies both to qualified nurses and to student population, so we are bound by the code in that respect. And there's also an urgency in terms of managing that risk, that we need to act without delay if we believe that somebody is at risk. The sorts of concerns that the NMC documents refer to are things about delivery of care, risks to health and safety. It may be about the environment, which could relate to staffing numbers, things like that, fitness to practice of colleagues, and also the misuse or unavailability of clinical equipment. And there's been some reference to that around COVID-19, and the NMC put a statement out. So there are some key principles around that, but I think that that's the black and white area, and I think we know very clearly what we do then. I think when we're talking about our values and the things that underpin our care, about being person-centred, about having integrity, where we feel that they are jeopardised in some way, that's more of a grey area. And I do quite a bit of teaching within pre-reg about the impact of assertiveness and your ability to challenge. And it is interesting how we can raise those concerns. And I have done a bit of research. There are a couple of documents, and I don't know if we'll be able to upload those details if people are interested and they're doing any work in this area. And one that I found was some research undertaken by Birmingham University in 2017 entitled Virtuous Practice in Nursing. And it was a research report forward by Sir Robert Francis, who no essay is complete in undergraduate nursing without a reference to the Francis report. But that was actually a survey that looked at the underpinning values of people when they entered their undergraduate training and as they developed throughout their training, and then also looked at registrants to see whether they had changed from like at the start of your training and all the way through. It said that there's a general consensus among nurses at all levels of seniority that there are some central core virtues that nurses possess and need to possess, but also there was some reflection that at times our working life may hinder that slightly because of some of the constraints that we work within. And that report actually cited things like a lack of time, something to do with the requirements of the job, which may be related to staffing, stress, and the pressures of work. So it does look at some other issues around that. There's also a really interesting article by Terry et al., Understanding and Meeting Your Legal Responsibilities of a Nurse, which that's often an area that we feel at risk about if we feel that we are exposed by being in a short-staffed area or working over our hours and things. I won't go on too much, but I also use some statistics, and they're as far back as 2005. And I would hope that things are different now, but it was some survey about that it was quite common for people to be aware of poor practice and not raise those concerns. So 62% of nurses see co-workers taking shortcuts, and 48% believe that co-workers show poor judgment, but only 10% of nurses at that time in 2005 actually raised those concerns. So I think in the area of values, it's important that we have a voice and that we raise those issues and we don't let them go, because I think it is important that we actually stand up for the things that we believe in, that are the things that underpin our practice. The document in 2005 said that there's often disrespect at work, and there are some times when teamwork isn't good. We need to have a voice and we need to raise that. So I think the standards and the values are dealt with slightly differently if we feel that they're being questioned. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Julie. Those statistics are really sad. I wonder what they would be like now. We will also link or reference those two articles also. Yeah, so final one of our predetermined questions is back to Rachel. So it's maybe moving away slightly from values and standards and more towards the RCN side of things, but are there any other areas where the professional body of the RCN works and which we haven't touched on? Maybe not.
Thank you. I think one of them actually that I'd reflect on is RCN Congress and how the Professional Nursing Committee has a role there. And very sadly, of course, this year Congress is not happening in its usual format. I think our wonderful Congress Chair, BJ Walther, and the Agenda Committee are working with the college to look at some virtual online debates and events. But thinking about how Congress usually works, then Congress really plays a critical role in directing some of the work of the college, so that when a resolution is passed at Congress, that helps to set the agenda for the college. And once they are passed, then they come to one or other of those two committees, so the Professional Nursing Committee or the TUC, to provide the governance lead to the work. So really to provide that governance oversight, making sure that the people who proposed the resolution are involved in the work that follows on from it, making sure that the right stakeholders are involved, making sure that the work progresses in the way that was behind that resolution and that we feel is right. And actually a lot of the resolutions that come to Congress are focused on the professional work of the college. I think sometimes there's a perception of Congress as a very trade union focused event, but actually there's a lot of the work that comes through there focuses on that professional work. And so PNC members will then take a lead for each of those Congress items, and that's generally reported back at Congress. But we'll be looking at different ways to report back to members this year on the work that's come out. But I think that's probably another important aspect of the work that we haven't really touched on.
Yes, good point. I have never been to Congress and was gutted to miss it this year, but next year?
Yep.
Next year. Okay, thank you.
There will be some virtual stuff in the meantime online, which will be interesting and a different way of interacting.
You're right. Yeah, I am really looking forward to those virtual sessions. They'll be really good. Yes, so that is the end of our pre-planned questions. George, I can see, has been putting together some of the additional questions that we've had from our audience. So over to George.
Thank you, Kendall, and thank you everyone for your answers so far. So first up, I've got a question for Rachel from an anonymous person. In what ways do the TUC and the PNC collaborate? And for those that don't know, the TUC is the Trade Union Committee in the RCN.
Thank you, George. And I think sort of as I said earlier, that I think it's really important that those two committees work together and work together with council. So one of the sort of quite practical ways that happens is that we have regular meetings between the chair of council, myself as chair of the Professional Nursing Committee, and Graham Reevy, chair of the Trade Union Committee, who I know has been on one of your webinars before, I think, or a couple of your webinars before, and alongside some of the chairs of the other governance committees within the college. And so really trying to make sure that our work programmes are aligned, trying to increase the communication between us, so that I always try really hard not to talk about, you know, the professional side or the trade union side, because I think they're two complementary functions, and we need to get those working better together. Again, it's a shame that Congress didn't go ahead. I don't know whether our fringe item would have been accepted, but we were hoping to work together on a fringe item so that people could really see those two working well together. I think one of the very concrete examples recently of the sort of professional and trade union aspects of the college working together, not specifically the two committees, was actually around the strike in Northern Ireland, where there was, you know, a really strong professional message. It was a, you know, that was an act of professional bravery, as well as being focused on the trade union requirements for that act. So I think that that's an area that we can learn from. Some people may know that just recently there's been a review of the governance structures within the RCN. Again, that came from a Congress resolution last year, and that's recently reported. And one of the things that talks about is, you know, improving the communication and the clarity around delegated authority between the council, the trade union committee, and the professional nursing committee. And I think certainly Graham and I, as chairs of our respective committees, are really committed to try and make sure that we work more closely together.
Fab. Thank you very much, Rachel. And now I've got a question for Julie. Should our nurse lecturers also be held to the NMC standards, as we're students, not patients, but should they also be accountable if they omit things that should be acted on?
Okay, thank you, George. Okay, so yes, I think nurse lecturers as registrants are duty bound to follow the code. I think if we take the Bolam test, which is that people are judged by being an average performance of a role, so I think we are judged by it. If there is anything that we've omitted, then I think that we should be raising that. If we feel that somebody isn't competent and delivering their sessions well, I don't think it's a sackable offence. I think it may be areas where people may need to improve. So if you worked within a clinical area, there would be clinicians that perform over a range of standards. There may be lecturers that do perform over a range of standards. I think it's important as a lecturer to be very reflective about my sessions. So when I leave a session, I believe I'm only as good as my last session, and I'm quite reflective about how that went. I also have live feedback from students. I have post-it notes that can be completed anonymously, which is quite risky, but you know, I think it is really important personally as a registrant that I deliver my sessions well, and I truly reflect the code which underpins my practice as a nurse. So I think it is important, and I think we are duty bound to adhere to the code. Please don't go back and raise it with everybody and say, I think you omitted something, but I think that is something that we should actively be doing as students and as colleagues of lecturers to ensure that we're all performing at our best.
Fab. Thank you very much, Julie. Now I've got quite a topical question for Alison. There is a lot of discussion online around student nurses and providing a service. We're on placement to learn, and I don't know how I feel about suggestions that we should be paid while on placement. What are your thoughts as PNC?
I don't know if the PNC's discussed it, but we, I think the Students' Committee is really best placed to answer this for their position. Certainly there are issues with the employment model. So one of the things that PNC does do, it's a governance committee, but it helps with things like evidence-based practice. So we're a resource for the forums, and we also work with some universities who do research for the college. And the research in this area and particularly the workforce research in this area shows that the traditional paid model was quite an exploitative model. Some people are quite keen to go back to it. I think if you're a student and you're not getting the bursary and you're not being paid, I can really see why people would advocate for that. But I think people need to be aware of the pros and cons of that kind of model, an employment-based model. We've got some colleagues that are in that model now, and their experience is very mixed. So people like the nursing associate. The issue about our students in the service is another one we've been discussing quite a lot over the last 24 hours, particularly after Helen Whately's letter. Students are not meant to be of the service, they're meant to be supernumerary, but we all know the reality is probably a bit different. They contribute, absolutely, but to say they're part of the service means actually you don't even need to be a student, you could just be a worker. And I think that's quite a slippery slope. So we'd have to see what the PNC's actual view is. That's my view as an academic that sits on the PNC and represents London.
Could I come in, George, as
Yes,
well on this, really, because I agree with Alison, and we have had some discussion with Jess and Kendall, and I think and it will be something that we'll discuss further at our next PNC meeting. But I think it's really important to recognise that nursing students make a huge contribution to care, which is, as Alison is saying, very different to being sort of part of the service and paid in that way. And I think, you know, what has happened over recent months is obviously students have really stepped up with their extended clinical placements, have on a temporary basis become part of that paid workforce. But I, you know, recognise that nursing students are there to learn, and yes, recognise their contribution, which is why the RCN has its Fund the Future Nursing campaign with those two principal asks about that, you know, tuition fees should be paid for student nurses, and they should get a maintenance grant to cover the cost of living, in recognition of the fact that they make a contribution to care, that they are working on the wards, but that also they are students, they are there to learn, and the sort of the quality of learning shouldn't be compromised. And you know, we can all do our, well, back in my day, I came through as a paid student on the ward. As Alison said, there is a risk there of being exploited as cheap labour, and I think, you know, the Royal College of Nursing, alongside a number of other partners, has worked really hard to try and maintain that supernumerary status of nursing, and I think we need to carry on doing that, while recognising there are other routes, and for some people the apprenticeship model, which is a different model, might work and might fit some people's circumstances. So I think looking into that, you know, the different routes of nursing is something that's really important.
Fab, thank you very much, Rachel. So sorry, my screen's just frozen. Okay, I've got an interesting comment on Twitter from Craig, which I wondered if you'd like to discuss. One could argue that you can't have comparable standards to the rest of the world if you have nursing shortages. Everything else just goes to pot if you don't have the nursing staff.
So who wants to pick up that, or shall I do an initial response and then see who wants to come in? So I think that, you know, we need to maintain our standards, but absolutely right. And, you know, I've just mentioned one of the RCN's campaigns that I think is really important. That's Fund the Future. And I think there is another one which is around staffing for safe and effective care. And I think that is critical. I think it is very difficult to maintain the standards that we wish to maintain when there aren't enough nurses there on the ward to fulfil that. We've got, you know, good and rising evidence about the difference that can be made by, you know, having the right ratio of nurses and having actually the nurses with the right education levels. So absolutely, it's something that we need to strive for, but we also need to work to maintain our standards. Looks like Julie wants to come in as well.
Yeah, I mean, in some of the work that I looked at to answer my allocated questions, so the article from Terry about understanding and meeting legal requirements does explore the area of being short-staffed, basically. So said there are lots of nurses recording that they may have missed care. It's a growing concern in a lot of nursing areas because of being short-staffed. So within that article, it says that in the US, they identified that 73% of nurses reported missing at least one care activity during their last shift, and even higher levels of undone work, including not completing care plans, was in the UK study. It does talk about our safe and effective staffing that's in place, obviously, in Wales, and work around it is being done elsewhere. One of the things that is something to really focus on, it says nurses must remember that they owe a duty of care to each patient. They cannot owe half a duty of care because the ward is short-staffed and they have twice the number of patients to look after. Nurses need to know what the organisational process is if they're faced with a short-staffed shift, including how to escalate their concern and who has authority to request span for agency. So important that the nurse completes any organisational reporting documentation, such as a DATEX. It's really important because that's how change can be brought about. Thank you.
Can I come in there just as well in the back of that, Julia? This is Siobhan. Just, I think in terms of the conversation that we're having in relation to professional values and the integrity and professionalism and honesty. And I think back in terms of what Julie was saying about reporting and escalation of concerns. And I think within that, everybody recognises the national shortage of nursing, but in terms of our own professional and personal responsibilities, in terms of knowing what we can do within our capabilities and within our capabilities as a professional and capabilities within the resources that we're provided with. And I think we need to be conscious of that in terms of that you're not putting yourself at risk if you feel that you're not within a safe environment with staffing, and that you know through the processes that Julie has outlined how to escalate that, but to continue with making sure that you uphold your professional values moving forward.
Fab, thank you very much everyone for your answers. I've now got a question for Siobhan. The Northern Ireland collaboration sounded amazing. How can we build on this joining up nationally?
Thank you, and I know Rachel indicated this earlier in relation to the work of both the trade union side and the professional side of the organisation coming together. And I think, as Rachel had indicated, the strike, as unfortunate as it was in Northern Ireland, has highlighted the work of the RCN in terms of how it does have the very important roles of both the trade union and professional body, because the two came in hand, because the strike was because of a professional issue. It was because of safe staffing and also because of pay, but it was mostly in relation to safe staffing and how we could bring this forward to and we had the support of the public, but how we were able to escalate that and bring that to the government to be able to negotiate and influence was through our trade union policies and practices and expertise. So I think it was a very good example of how both sides of both the professional and trade union committee or roles of, and I think nationally, I know Guernsey, and I mean, everybody can use that as a learning point in terms of how these two came together for the trade union policies to influence and obtain the professional standards that we wanted to maintain for the profession. I just think it's something that we can all learn from, and I don't think it was a plan. I think it became just through evolution, I suppose, in terms of how the processes had to come by. We balloted for a strike. We weren't necessarily sure what way we were going to go, but we had a very big turnout, and I think everybody could learn from in terms of how the professional aims and objectives of the organisation were brought forward by the trade union aims and objectives of the organisations, so much so that we worked together and learned together and definitely have more of a cohesive relationship in Northern Ireland in terms of what our aims are for the profession, both Northern Ireland, and how we can influence that nationally.
Thank you very much, Siobhan. So I've got one final question, and it's, as the PNC, what's your opinion on the issue of failing to fail? Now, I believe this is on practice placements when mentors and students get too close to each other, sort of professionally in their relationship, and the mentor might be afraid to fail the students because of this close relationship.
Okay, yeah, I'll answer that one. There was a really important report that came out, and off the top of my head I can't remember the year, but I'm guessing it was around 2008, 2009, and I think it was a report that was supported and published by the RCN that looked at the issue of failure to fail. I've been in nurse education now for 18 years, and there has been an issue with failure to fail, which, as you allude to, when we had the mentor roles, often either mentors didn't feel in a position that they could challenge a student if they felt they weren't competent, and often got to the end of practice and thought, oh, well, I'll just pass them and maybe the next person will look at their care and perhaps fail them if it's not of a certain standard. But often that happened, and happened repeatedly, and people got to the point of qualifying and even potentially did qualify, and at any point hadn't really been challenged when they should have failed much earlier on. And I think it's a two-pronged issue. I've been involved with the students who in their third year failed during clinical practice and exited the course. And that, from an educational point of view, we have taken up 2.5 years of that person's life, and that was very unfortunate, because maybe in their first placement, if it wasn't an appropriate career choice, they should have had that level of counselling and opportunity and not have spent longer in their training than was necessary to not succeed. I guess the key to it now, and this move to the practice supervisor, practice assessor, academic assessor, makes it a much more robust and supported process. There is the underpinning training and education to take on those roles, and also that engagement with people who really want to be involved in supporting students. So hopefully much more of a nurturing and a mentoring and a supportive process where feedback is regularly given, that the student is taking a reflective process to their practice and is welcoming the level of feedback and wishing to be in a relationship with the practice supervisor and assessor to improve their practice. I think in the past often it was used in a manipulative way sometimes by students in terms of their relationship with their mentor. Hopefully now that relationship is now much more transparent in that tripartite approach to supporting students. So hopefully it's a much rarer thing to happen. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Judy. And I've got one final question now for Kendall, which is the PNC seems quite out of reach for students. What can we do to make it more within reach and more accessible? Kendall. I think you might be muted, Kendall.
I should have done better at that, sorry. Thank you for the question and for putting me on the spot. We are currently working to try and bring the PNC and the Students' Committee together on a few projects. So that's one way that we are trying to improve how accessible the PNC is to its students. I guess having me on the committee also enables the PNC to be accessible to students, because I am the student voice on the committee. So I attend all of the Students' Committee meetings and our daily discussions about everything that's been going on, sometimes hourly discussions, and I can feed that through to the PNC, and equally the PNC's work can get fed to the Students' Committee. So I act as a bridge between those two entities. So in a way, that's a way of ensuring that the PNC is a bit more within reach of the student membership. We also do this in other ways. So we also have various social media channels for students. as well as newly qualified nurses. We've obviously got the new RCN NQN Twitter feed, which if you're not already a member of, please look us up. And through those sorts of social media platforms, we promote the various different aspects of the RCN. And so the PNC's work does naturally filter into the life of a student, and they just may not be particularly conscious of it, maybe. But it's a good question and something that we should probably put some more thought into. Thanks. Which means that was the final question, George, am I right?
Yes, sorry, Kendall, yes. That was
lovely, that's great. So sadly, that is all we have time for. So I don't know about you as the audience, but I have learnt a lot over the last hour. It's been a super complex conversation, and it's such a complex subject that I feel like our guests have really helped us in answering those questions. I'll definitely be able to carry out my role both within the PNC and the Students' Committee better after having this hour, and it'll definitely improve my practice. So there's been a lot of food for thought, and I'm definitely going to have to re-watch this one because we covered a lot of ground. So I just have to say thank you to a number of people. So obviously our guest presenters, again, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. Our AV team, Will and Gary, thank you so much. We really appreciate you facilitating these great events. Thanks very much indeed. And our audience, thanks for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed it and found it informative. And thank you, of course, to George for being a very great co-host and sorting out those additional questions for me. So the recording, as I said, is going to be available on the RCN YouTube channel. Links to that will go out through our social media channels, so look out for those. Any additional questions that you might have, please pop them to us. We are always happy to answer your questions, whether you think of them now or in weeks, years' time. We'll try and answer those for you. And it's now just to look forward to our next conversation, which is actually hosted by George on Friday, that's the 26th at 8 p.m. It's a very serious and important topic. It's called Let's Talk About Death. Please look forward to that. It's a really important conversation and definitely something we all need to think about, particularly as students moving on in our careers. So finally, thank you to all and good night.